Hello, Robs. We're back with Anyone's Son, a true story by Roberta Roche with the murderer and recent parolee Harry De La Roche Jr. This is chapter 4, The Citadel. It's section 11 of the book. I'm not sure why they do this weird thing, but I've already stated that. And I'm really eager to get on to the Kennedy book, so I have, 200 more pages to go before I can do that, so let's get on with it. When we stopped beside the parade grounds to ask directions in the barracks, parents and boys were scattered in small groups everywhere. I fleetingly thought, okay, this is it. You can get a new reputation. Nobody really has to know what life was like before. I even thought of changing my name and instead of using Harry, picking up on my middle name and saying I was called Bill. As my father snapped more pictures, I kept thinking of this. Then, when he finished his roll of film and we found out where to go, we climbed back into our station wagon and drove to Stevens Barracks. I was assigned to room 4449 and to Company N in the 4th Battalion. My roommate was Louis Danabali, a football player from Allentown, Pennsylvania. I also picked up uniforms and my M14 rifle. My parents got Citadel car stickers and t-shirts for Ronnie and Eric. The first night we went to banquet for parents and new freshmen, or knobs, and my family and I happened to sit with Lieutenant Colonel William Harris, Dean of Undergraduate Studies. When I talked with him, he told me if I ever had any problems to come and discuss them with him. I probably should have done this, but I never did. That same night we met Frederick Cronus, a cadet who came from Germany since his father was in the Air Force. He was president of the Lutheran Club, and he talked to us for quite a while my parents and Ronnie asked questions about the fourth class system. The family kidded about this tradition that gives upperclassmen authority over freshmen, but I just stood and listened. Then Cronus told me to see him if I ever had any problems. The next day, I unpacked my gear and we did some silly things like running around the parade group with little bags filled with all kinds of crap hanging around our necks. Bad attitude. I remember thinking, I can still leave. They haven't cut my hair. Actually, my hair wasn't long since I'd had it trimmed recently. But I still had to have it shaved to a stubble just like all of the freshmen. This is so all fourth classmen start out in the same way. All your identity is taken away, and the school breaks you down as much as it can before it begins to rebuild you. You're made into a nothing on purpose, and as a knob in the fourth class system, you have to walk silently in single file with your chin in and chest out. Upperclassmen bark orders and criticism, but for freshmen it's yes sir or no sir. My parents hung around for a little while, but since they were on vacation, they soon took off for their next destination and other motel reservations. I had snapshots of them in my wallet, along with pictures of our house and my car, so I wasn't homesick. When they left us, as many of the freshmen were, when their parents drove away, I made up my mind that since I was here, I was going to make it. I was knocked down the next day, however, when I got into trouble with my first squad sergeant. Sergeant, through a misunderstanding, a freshman squad sergeant and corporal have the greatest, and there's the cadets, effect on him, and my first squad sergeant was a junior who made life miserable for me. One of the activities at the Citadel is a thing called junior sword drill. It's a precision team of juniors, and freshmen aren't allowed to see it. Whenever it came to the battalion to practice, we were supposed to go to our rooms and close our doors behind us. I moved a little slowly, too slowly to suit the squad sergeant, so he ordered me to stay in my room until I was called to leave. He forgot to call me for afternoon formation, so when it was time for that, I didn't know whether to stay in my room or report on my own for formation. When I heard the cannon call for formation, I figured I'd be late, so I thought I'd better stay in my room and wait for someone to come. For some reason, the sergeant didn't miss me, and he gave an all-present report. Later, when he learned I hadn't been there, he was extremely upset because his report, all present, could mean lots of trouble for him and cause him to lose his stripes. He was angry when he came for me, and it certainly didn't help that by then I'd decided to leave my room since I didn't know what to do. He started screaming and yelling, and then he got his friends on my back because of what I'd done. It was soon a case of here's De La Roche and more, let's get hairy again. In fact, when I arrived for mess, I heard, look out for a waste product by the name of De La Roche. At first, people knew the reason for putting pressure on me, but then it became a habit, and they didn't know why they did it. For a while, I didn't know what to do about my troubles with the sergeant, but then I decided to leave it alone because if I made a big thing of it, they'd hand it to me even more. As we went from August to September, nothing seemed to get better. For cadre week and the weeks after that, upperclassmen, as Wilbur Boyce warned, like to throw everything at you to test whether or not you could take it. The school frowns on brutality and tries not to let it happen, and it's striving to end a lot of the hazing that went on in the past. But still, whenever you do things wrong, these people yell at you, and you're told you're lower than whale shit when you have to walk off sides while going to a class, off sidewalks. We couldn't talk on campus unless we were spoken to, and we called upperclassmen Mister and saluted senior officers. When we went to and from the showers, we wore military hat, bathrobe, and slippers, and when we weren't polishing shoes and brass, it seemed we were constantly bracing. That means you stand at attention with your body as rigid as a board and your chin held in till it creased. Physical endurance was important, so along with drilling and running, you got racked for punishments. When you were ordered to do push-ups with a rifle, you held the rifle between your feet and balanced your garrison cap on your back. When either the rifle or cap started falling, you had to start again. You'd feel as though your arms would give out, and sometimes you got so tired you fell flat on your face. Meal times were the toughest, and though Wilbur Boyce had filled me in on what would happen then, I didn't expect the bullshit. Before you were allowed to eat, you had to go through a silly routine in which you balanced your plate on two fingers and said some crazy things like, would any of you fine Southern gentlemen and high outstanding Citadel students care for anything on my plate? Before you were permitted to take a bite, you had to wait for a no. You were expected to be super quick when serving the upperclassmen, and while you were trying to eat yourself, you also had to watch their plates and anticipate their wants. When you served iced tea, for instance, you had to have just enough ice in the glass, and when a glass was half empty, you were supposed to reach for it and fill it up again. If you were slow on the pickup, you'd get shit from the upperclassmen, and while I was a student, they'd throw their glass up for a freshman to catch. I understand they've stopped that now, but it happened twice to me, and once I was hit by flying glass when an empty glass shattered on my plate. There were other crazy table games too, like eating just with your mouth. About once a month, we'd have cream puffs, and then there would be a contest in which you were told to turn your plate over, put the cream puff on the plate, and while sitting on your hands, eat the cream puff slowly with your mouth. I said I wouldn't do it, and when cadre members persuaded me with threats, I clammed up and didn't acknowledge they were even talking to me. At first, except for things like this, I really tried for a while. I went to all of my classes and also played intramural sports, volleyball, basketball, and football. I even enjoyed the running since I have always liked to run. Sometimes when I was the guide and felt like being smart-assed, I'd speed up on the running so the officers would tire quickly. Then when I was told to slow things down, I'd slow up for just a few minutes and then start speeding again. A few activities such as this got me the reputation of trying to beat the system and being a rebellious spirit. When more and more things got to me, I became more defiant. I developed the habit of explaining things which pissed everybody off, and instead of answering yes sir or no sir, I'd add something else too. My company tactical officer was Captain Matthew Sawtell, and he was an all right guy, but I'd ask the same questions again and again, and that drove him up a wall. One day, when I felt like rebelling, one of the upperclassmen who was drilling my platoon saw me laughing in formation. So he said, come by my room. When I came, he gave me a talk on discipline and rank, and then after he had racked me, he asked me if I understood why I was being punished. I answered, no, sir, I don't understand, and that really got to him. As time went on, several stories circulated about me. Sometimes my roommate would mention that on occasion I'd wake up at night and sit in the dark and chain smoke. There were other stories about smoking pot, which we did a couple of times, though you're taking your life in your hands if you have pot on campus. Some people accused me of not taking showers and said that my room smelled foul. A corporal said I looked like hell and must sleep in my uniform. I came in for several abuses because of this reputation. On one night, for example, two upperclassmen decided to throw me around for kicks to see if I would bounce. Then another time, two others set out to teach me to fly. When they do this, they spread your arms and legs and twirl you until you're dizzy. Then they finally let me go. They finally let me go. They sent me into a steel dresser. They finally let me go. They sent me. All right, that's an odd sentence, but later a psychiatrist suggested I might have had a concussion as a result of this. Psychiatrist? I want to take you to a doctor, buddy. There were other uncomfortable incidents too. One was a thing in which you were asked, "Are you strong as a rock?" If you answered yes, as expected, the upperclassmen would hand you a rock with your company letter on it. You'd have to carry that enormous rock everywhere you went. And once, when it was handed to me, I was sure it bruised my ribs since I heard something crack in there. Since my roommate Lou was a football player, I'd often be in my room by myself when he was at away games. And once I was in there a little crocked after being out on the town, when suddenly some visitors burst into the room and put a blanket over my head. Then they proceeded to cut my leg and put nail polish remover in the cut. And I didn't imagine this happened because when I awakened in the morning, the slash from a penknife was there. Perhaps the worst occasion was the time a corporal asked me, "Do you want to bow?" I was company runner at the time, which means you run all over doing errands and delivering mail. I was wearing sweatpants and a sweatshirt that day, and I was feeling hot, as well as pretty exhausted from doing all that running. The heat was making me nauseous too, and I was starting to sweat. So when on arriving in an upperclassman's room, a corporal said, "Do you want to bow?" I understood his southern drawl and thought that he had asked me, "Do you want a bath?" I answered, "Yes, sir, it's hot in here," thinking I'd get a shower, but instead they kicked me in the groin until I passed out in pain. I hit my head on a steel dresser again, and when I came to, they were laughing. Some news of this incident eventually got out, but how can you really prove it when it's frowned upon by the college and done behind closed doors? In spite of all this bullshit, I had some good times too, and I tried to listen to the upperclassmen who bolstered me by saying that every freshman gets picked on to some extent at least. It's a matter of how you take it, my second squad sergeant said, and when you look back from an upperclassman's view, you'll realize we've all been through it. I know, I replied as I hid my real feelings. Don't worry, I'm going to make it. My second sergeant was Mark Coker, who was liked by everybody. He really loved the Citadel, but he was compassionate, and he didn't think that military men had to be blood and guts George Pattons. I used to talk to him a lot, and once when he asked us to write him a note about our feelings at college, he said, "To make it easy, tell it as though you're writing a letter to my girl." I wrote, "You're lucky to have Mr. Coker. He's someone to trust and relate to." I've made some friends at the Citadel, despite my reputation, and sometimes we'd go to Dino's, a King Street drinking spot. On Mondays, I went to the Lutheran Club and met Pastor Wilfred Hendricks, who was called Rocky by everyone. He was the pastor of St. Barnabas Lutheran Church a few blocks away from the campus. At meetings, I'd see Fred Cronus, the fellow I met my first night, and I also got to know Pete Salerno, a cadet from Washington Township, a town very near my home. Pete was a really good guy, and he said at our first meeting, "Be sure to come and see me if you ever have any problems or think you're going to quit." I'm sure Pete Salerno meant this, as other people did, but none of the people who said this knew I worked things out myself. Once I went on a camping trip with the Lutheran Club, and I talked a lot with Rocky while over at Sullivan's Island. Both of us liked philosophy, and I'd read a lot of it. So while others were out playing basketball, Rocky and I would stay inside and talk about such philosophers as Friedrich Nietzsche and Bertrand Russell. But even with these good times, I had many troubled moments, and as early as mid-September, I thought of changing schools. I didn't hate the Citadel, but I hated a few people in it. A change posed a major problem, though. What would I tell my parents? It would hurt them badly if I mentioned dropping out, especially since they'd taken a loan to cover my first-year expenses. Damn eyes itching. In the end, I decided to stick it out and stay for the rest of the year. Then, after I finished my freshman year, I'd planned to go somewhere else. I wrote my parents about how I felt and brought up the subject of a transfer. On campus, I started to stay in my room as much as I possibly could. The physical stuff wasn't killing me. I could manage that, but I felt my grades were getting screwed up, and that meant more problems at home. It wasn't so much that the work was too hard, but the constant stresses and upsets made studying difficult. And then, in addition to everything else, I was concerned about Ronnie. I'd never said very much to him about either pot or hard drugs except to tell him to watch it. And even when he wrote to me and said he was buying J's, I flippantly answered on 2 occasions, "Have some on hand when I get home to soothe the savage beast, and get a hold of your head, friends, and send some shit down here." But now I was starting to worry that something was happening to Ronnie while I was away at school. I'd learned from other letters that he was involved in shopping around so he could become a dealer. And when my family phoned on my birthday, Ronnie was completely burned out. My father knew something was wrong with him, but I think Dad thought it was drinking. So when he said, "Isn't he sickening?" I didn't say a word. My mother was on the upstairs phone, and my father was talking downstairs. So after I talked to the family, I said, "When we're finished talking together, put Ronnie on again." I heard my mother hang up the phone as soon as Ronnie got on. So then I said, "Listen, Ronnie boy, unless you start cutting out this shit, I'm really going to bust your ass as soon as I get home." I tried to talk to him in a code, but he didn't know what I was saying. So after we spoke a minute or so, I said, "Get Dad on the phone." It was then that I asked my father, "What's with Ronnie tonight?" "I don't think he's feeling very well," my father said in disgust. I continued to worry about Ronnie, and this nagged at me all the time while my own difficulties compounded with every passing day. My parents opposed the transfer for my sophomore year, so when they gave me a solid no, I decided there was no further point in staying at the Citadel. But I couldn't write back and tell them that if I couldn't transfer, I was leaving school, and I wasn't ready to mention that maybe I'd even move out of the house and work and pay for another college as soon as I got enough money. My father wouldn't like that, but I'd tell him this is my choice, and if I were paying for it myself, he couldn't do very much. The more I looked ahead to this, the more anxious I was to leave. So I had to come up with some way to get out of the Citadel fast. I didn't want to tell the school, "You guys are following up my grades and running too much crap," because if I said something like that, I would get even more. I had to think of a cover up that would save my face. I also had to have an excuse that no one would dare to check. In the end, I remembered my mother's cancer and decided to spread the word that my mother had terminal cancer and I needed an early leave. If I used the word terminal, my story would really be strong and it would seem very logical to need a leave right away. While I was setting things up in my mind, I decided to add that the illness was causing such money problems I might not be able to come back to school after Thanksgiving vacation except to collect my belongings. This would set me up in a spot where I could drop out at that time, or maybe come back till Christmas, since my room was paid until then. When I put my story together, I mentioned it to several people, and as the story got around, the senior sponsor assigned to me asked if another senior would be able to take me on since he had already had a freshman who had problems at home. In the senior sponsor system that existed till 1977, all freshmen had a senior who could either be a helpful big brother or a master who made you his slave. My new senior was Walter Singleton from Beaufort, South Carolina, who planned to study pharmacy when he graduated from the Citadel. The first night I met Walter, he asked me about the problems I had, but I only brought up the illness at home and kept the rest to myself. Walt wanted to phone my parents, but I told him I wished he wouldn't. For the rest of the time at the Citadel, Walt was a real big brother. Almost as soon as I met him, he invited me out on the town and took me to an enormous buffet where freshmen could eat all they wanted. We went to a Woody Allen movie next, and then we went to the officers' club at the naval base. When I knew that I was going to leave, my feeling was, I don't care. So I stayed in my room more than ever and began cutting most of my classes. By November, I wasn't feeling well, so I went to the infirmary and stayed for 3 days for diarrhea, plus nausea and vomiting. For my last 2 weeks on campus, I was well. I was assigned a new roommate. Richard Dubois from North Caldwell, New Jersey. He was a really nice guy, and I told him about my mother's health and the money problem at home. He knew that I was copping out, but he chalked it up to this. As I mentioned to more and more people that I might not return from Thanksgiving, everyone started saying I ought to do everything I could to try to come back till Christmas so I could get credits for a semester. Walt Singleton kept encouraging this, and I also got it from Captain Sawtell when I told him I'd be leaving. You've already paid for the semester, he explained, so it's going to cost you the same whether you leave at Thanksgiving or whether you stay till Christmas. Why don't you try to finish and then transfer your credits? I guess I started wavering because while I told some people I may not be back from Thanksgiving, I also told some others I'll probably stay till Christmas. I decided to keep the door open and not take my property home. Besides, if I had my things with me, my parents would think it was funny, and I'd have to tell them right away that I was planning to leave. Walt Singleton was really great in helping me get home, and a few days before Thanksgiving vacation, he personally persuaded Captain Sawtell to submit a request for an early leave. Captain Sawtell sent the request to the commandant, Colonel Walter B. Clark, then Colonel Ralph Crosby, and an assistant commandant said I could leave on November 20th rather than November 24th, when the vacation began. Once the leave was granted, I had to let my parents know fast that I was coming home early, and I had to have a reason for the change in plans. I knew the school had a system in which certain guys with good ratings as freshmen were asked to come back as corporals to train freshmen the following year. For lack of anything better, I ran that story on my parents and added, the guys with this rating were getting early leave for Thanksgiving. 2 days before I was scheduled to leave, Walt went with me to Colonel Crosby's office. We'd like very much to have you come back, Colonel Crosby declared, but if you really made up your mind that you won't be back from Thanksgiving, it would be to your advantage to take your gear home now. It's open to pilferage if you leave it, and if you can't get back, we'll only have to inventory it and ship it up to you. I don't want to take it now, sir, I said, but whether or not I return to school, I'll definitely come back for my things. I got the impression as we talked that the colonel thought I wasn't sure what I was going to do, but he said I could leave my stuff there, so I told everybody I'd be back to pick up my belongings. And at the time I said this, I expected I would. And that's the end of that section. And that's the end for now, bruv. Goodbye.